Hello and welcome back to another episode. Now this morning is the morning after the night before. I've got some lovely coffee just over there. Last night we went to see Avengers Age of Ultron. It was kind of like a last minute sort of deal. My wife and I were both at work. We decided to just book the thing, meet at the cinema, and we went to see this film. And the big question in our minds was, would this amazing setup that we've seen of Phase 2 have this amazing crescendo? Would Avengers Age of Ultron live up to the hype, and would it surpass the achievement that was the original Avengers film, which broke all sorts of records, which really was a lovely surprise, seeing a synergy of so many different characters in a very powerful and impactful film. Would Joss Whedon be able to bottle lightning a second time? That was the big question. And I have to say, to a certain extent, the answer is not quite. Now, I'll justify myself, I'll explain myself, and don't worry, this video is completely spoiler-free, so you've got nothing to worry about. I'll only mention things that you see in the trailers, or that are alluded to in the trailers. However, by saying that it didn't quite make it to being this amazing part 2, we loved it, absolutely loved this film. We definitely will be getting it on DVD, and we could and will watch it several times, kind of thing. But it just wasn't quite there. Now, on the way home, in the car on the way back, my lovely wife, actually, she summed it up by saying, the problem is that this film just didn't go to 11.
If you can see, the numbers all go to 11. Look, right across the board. 11, 11,
and most of
11,
the amps go up to 10.
Exactly.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
Exactly. It's still stuck at 10, and to a certain extent, what else could we expect from a film which is capping off the second phase of a 3-phase plan? It's a film which is 2/3 of the way up a mountain. It has to hint at the peak, but it can't be the peak. It can't do that, because otherwise, most blokes, where can they go from 10, And that's the point. So to a certain extent, it was almost inevitable that it wasn't going to completely blow the first Avengers out of the water. And I'm not really disappointed by that, but I know, for example, my wife was. I know some people out there may be too. So I've made some notes in no particular order, and I suppose the first thing I'd like to say is that part of the problem with the film is that the threat and the way to defeat the threat aren't made clear. Now, that's a bit hard to explain unless you've seen the film, but I suppose what I would say is that the mechanism is very clear. That is Ultron, and where Ultron's come from and how he is made, the fact that he's sort of based on Iron Man and Tony Stark technology is quite clear in the film. That's very, very clear. But exactly what he wants, other than to maybe destroy the Avengers and possibly wipe out humanity, which again is hinted at in the trailers and certainly in that scene that's been released. Other than that, the end goal, the thing beyond that, the point of this stuff isn't made clear. Apparently it's to make us safe, but his logic isn't really spelled out, and therefore the end game, how the threat plays out and how the Avengers have to defeat him, sort of feels a bit haphazard. To a certain extent, this sort of fits in with, I suppose, with how they're feeling about Ultron and the threat that he's posing, because he knows them inside out. He's got access to all their files because he's some amazing cyborg robot type genius thing. But it's the first Avengers film felt as though they laid out a threat at the beginning. You felt as though you were with that threat. It was rolling, the energy was there, and people were scrambling to beat that threat in a fairly clear way. We knew what was going to happen, we knew what we had to stop. In this film, we didn't know what was going to happen, and there was no sense of what had to be stopped or how to stop it. It just occurred. So I suppose that's one of the problems that I had with the film. That said, though, the end game, as it were, the threat, the big weapon, when it's unfolded, when it's revealed, was very interesting and actually quite original. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it in a film before. The actual way, the mechanism that Ultron's going to use to wipe out humanity, as it were, it was very interesting, and it led to a finale, a battle finale in the film, which again was satisfying. So, again, I'm nitpicking, but this is possibly the reason why it didn't quite go to 11. Now, when it comes to Ultron himself, he's an interesting bad guy, and actually he was much better than I thought he'd be. I am somewhat aware of Ultron from the comics, and he's not the same Ultron. I don't think anyone was really expecting the same Ultron. Spader does a brilliant job portraying this character. The voice is very interesting, very evocative of this being which he is representing. And actually, the initial interaction, the initial introduction of Ultron is very clever. I like it. There's like two little sparks of intelligence on the screen. You have Jarvis, a little orange spark, and Ultron, a blue spark, and how they interact. Very, very clever, very satisfying introduction for the character. What I would say though is at times, again, because of this injection of humour, at times he's over-humanised. Now there's a reason for this, I'm not going to spoil that reason, but he is mirroring elements of humans, and there's a reason for him mirroring elements of humans. But at times it sort of undercut his threat, if you see what I mean. He felt a little bit too relaxed, almost, I'd say. I wanted a bit more intensity from Ultron, I suppose, a bit more evil machinations, because it made him feel a little bit like a straw man. He didn't feel like the guy who might actually end the world. He felt like, again, the bad guy in the end of Phase 2. Because we know that there's something else coming, and this is possibly the problem that underlines this film, is that we know that there's going to be a Phase 3 next, so we know that the threat can't be total, and it can't be all the way up at the top of this mountain. That said, though, I suppose it's interesting because it did draw on threads which were developed in Iron Man 3, and that's both a positive and a negative, because at times it felt like that the issues in this film were simply an extension of the problems that we saw Tony Stark tackling with technologically and personally in Iron Man 3. That works because it's part of this ongoing story, but I feel that Ultron deserved more. He deserved more than just possibly being an errant piece of technology, if you see what I mean. And the way that he's dealt with, the respect that he's given, therefore, both by the team, the Avengers, and also us, the audience members, possibly wasn't as great as I think it possibly should have been for a character like Ultron, you know? That said, though, again, great performance, and it did work in the film. This isn't a bad film, folks, not by a long shot. On that note, actually, there's lots of humour in the film. Joss Whedon injects lots of humour into most of the projects that he's involved with. But sadly, I think there was possibly too much of an attempt to inject humour into this film. At times, jokes just fell flat. The cinema that I was in, there were beats where you knew they were expecting a laugh or a giggle, or people just to sort of at least titter, and there wasn't anything. A couple of jokes happened where maybe they were sort of to do with relationships, this kind of thing. My wife and I burst out laughing, no one else laughed. And then there was one joke in particular where, like I say, it was just dead. It wasn't clear to most people that they should have been laughing. That said, though, the character humour is excellent. There are moments between characters which really stand out, which serve to build their characters and which are very, very funny, and people were guffawing, they were belly laughing in their seats. So at times the humour just falls a little bit flat, but for the most part, again, it's up there. This is a good film, folks. It's not a bad film, not by a long stretch. The cinematography is beautiful. There are some amazing shots in this film, really, really well thought out. Sometimes it feels possibly a little bit too smooth, maybe a battle scene, the camera is just moving so smoothly that it feels like a roller coaster, but apart from that, it's really, really well put together, and a really good use of sort of Hitchcock kind of tricks, you know, being able to move the camera through sets and continue to follow characters and show story elements as you go, as you're following a character, maybe through a building. Very, very clever stuff. I'd say there were some wonderful character moments, in particular between Hulk and Black Widow. I won't go into that too much. It's been hinted at in the trailers, but there's some really beautiful moments between those two characters. And speaking of Black Widow, it was really, really good to see some of her backstory. This is hinted at in the trailers, definitely, when you see the ballerinas in Russia. It was really good actually to get a little bit of a sense of her background and what plagues her, what her fears are, for example, what motivates her perhaps, and also a tragedy at the heart of Black Widow and her character. At the very certainly in this film, which is underscored by the presence of certain other characters who appear. In terms of characters and their interactions, we did have a little bit of a step backwards. You know, the Avengers were not getting on at times, but there were some good reasons for that. And because of this, actually, we had some really nice hints at what's to come. That is, in Captain America 3: Civil War, you can see the beginnings of Tony and Steve Rogers not getting along. Not that they didn't get along in this film, they worked as a team, they got along really, really well, but you can see that they're both characters, they're both men who see a problem and they want to crack it in different ways. You know, they they're gonna have the best interests of everyone at heart, but they're going to come at this as a particular issue with very different perspectives. And it wasn't too blunt, it wasn't too obvious, but it is going to be a nice thread leading into Civil War, definitely. Now, at times, because of all this character balancing and all the humour and all the needs that this film has to serve, the story did feel a little bit jumbled, because they're having to balance characters constantly, literally cut between one character and another. They have wonderful moments like talking about, for example, bad language. That's not a spoiler per se, but it's a common thread through the film. Bad language. There's a wonder there that these are good things to inject into the film to keep you with the characters on their journey. But the fact that it's got to serve essentially the wider Marvel Cinematic Universe and be accessible to people who haven't necessarily seen, say, the previous Avengers film or the other Marvel films, meant that this film felt a little bit as though it was struggling to keep all those plates spinning. Again, it's not a bad film, but it felt as though maybe we could have done with one or two less characters. For example, War Machine does turn up. That's far from the most important character reveal in this film, or character inclusion in this film. But War Machine is there, along with other characters that we've seen in previous Marvel films. And maybe he didn't have to be in this one. Maybe he didn't have to, because this behemoth, this great big monster, was slightly creaking under the weight, and therefore the story was possibly slightly suffering. The storytelling, that is, the way the story was being told, was possibly slightly suffering. Maybe it would have been good to have one of the new characters invest a bit more time in them rather than introduce some of the older characters. But there's a reason for that, which is revealed right at the end of the film. It's such a difficult balancing act, and Joss Whedon's done an amazing job. But again, it just didn't quite go to 11. Now, when it comes to new characters, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, brilliant. You can really see what Joss Whedon was talking about when he was saying that their powers would be visually interesting on film. For example, Scarlet Witch is very, very powerful, and she has a look about her powers, which is, it kind of feels like a sort of like an emo expressive dancer, if that makes sense. But it works really, really well. And Quicksilver, great. Some people are sort of griping about their accents, but they're not meant to be Russian. Some people go, oh, the silly Russian accents. They're not meant to be Russian. They're meant to be from a fictional Marvel country, so I can forgive them that. The character development is quite good with those guys, but again, maybe we could have done a little bit more, especially when it comes to Quicksilver and his character. But great stuff, good job there. Good introduction of those two characters to this Marvel universe. And two final notes. First of all, when you watch this film, if you watch this film, look out for S.H.I.E.L.D. Now, you're not going to be able to miss S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm not going to say how or when or where they turn up, But I've got a big question, a massive question mark. When we came home from the film, we actually put on the latest episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. In season 2, Skye is going through problems in the second half of the season, and you find yourself asking, how does that TV show now tie in with the cinematic universe? Especially, there's a certain moment, a big moment in the film, and you're thinking, well, hang on, in the TV show we've got certain issues with S.H.I.E.L.D. and another organisation, and now we've got that thing, and how does this element fit in with what's happening with S.H.I.E.L.D. there? It felt a little bit disjointed, a little bit unplugged, and given that we'd already seen Thor: The Dark World tie in with S.H.I.E.L.D., and we know that, for example, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, ties in with S.H.I.E.L.D., not having these elements match up quite in a way which was satisfying, and you'll see what I mean hopefully when you see the film, sort of distracted me. I found myself going, well, how on earth does that work? What's going on there? And how did that occur when we've got this stuff happening in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the TV show at the moment? So I think maybe they possibly slightly dropped the ball in terms of continuity and actually keeping this stuff beautifully plugged in as they have done so far. So I suppose those are my thoughts and notes having watched the film last night. I've had about 12 hours to think about it, to dream about it, and to wake up and present them to you. And I think broadly speaking, I'm very happy with this film, very, very satisfied. But it just doesn't go up to 11. I mean, as I say, it's hinting at what will be at the top of the mountain. It's hinting at phase 3, but it can't be at the top of that mountain. It can only ever, I don't know, be a placeholder. This is a base camp for the final ascent to the top, and I just hope that the MCU isn't starting to creak under its own weight of the need to serve its broader machinations, to bring in characters like Ant-Man in the near future, and to lead up to the Infinity Wars, the 2 Avengers films at the end of Phase 3, without, I suppose, forgetting the intricacies that it's already built in. I hope it's not going to start cracking, because at times this film felt a little bit as though it was starting just to creak a little bit, and if we're not careful, we may end up with, dare I say it, a bland Marvel film. A film which is serving so many plot points and trying to fit in with so many elements that it's not actually a satisfying experience. This is a satisfying experience, but it ran the risk of becoming a franchise plateau, a franchise placeholder, and that's a very dangerous place to be, I think. Nonetheless, I would give this film a really solid 4 out of 5, 4.5 out of 5 even. Very, very good, very, very satisfying, but just a couple of lingering doubts and question marks. But ultimately, if you love these guys, you're going to love the film, and you're going to have a great time. This is a film that's worth watching. It ties in well with the rest of the universe. It just doesn't quite hit some of the notes that it was aiming for. Well, I suppose with that in mind, I'd say go and see it, go and enjoy it, and see what you think. As ever, guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.